So we begin with some breaking news from Malaysia, where the Immigration Department has defied a court order and has deported more than 1,000 asylum seekers and children to Myanmar. Earlier, a Malaysian court granted the migrants a temporary stay. That ruling followed appeals from human rights activists. Malaysia had promised not to deport Rohingya or UN-registered refugees. That's because Myanmar is in the middle of a crisis following this month's coup. The military is coming under increasing international pressure. The G7, a group of the world's wealthiest nations, has condemned the junta for its violence towards protesters, saying the use of live ammunition is unacceptable. 3 protesters have been killed since February the 1st. They are refusing to back down until deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi is released. Let's go straight away to Tony Cheng, our correspondent, who joins us live from the Thai capital of Bangkok. And Tony, we'll come to the deportation in just a second. But first up, what is the latest with the protests? Are we seeing them at the same scale as Monday?
Not at the same scale, but they are still going on. Large numbers out on the streets in Yangon, others down in the south in Dawei. And I think the protesters are very keen to maintain the pressure that they worked up yesterday on the military and to get that message across that they are not going to back down, despite the intimidation and the crackdown we saw, particularly in Mandalay on Saturday when 2 protesters were killed when the security services opened fire. We also saw in Mandalay the funeral of one of the 2 people who were killed there. Those people have become a sort of representation for the protesters of the kinds of sacrifices they feel they're prepared to make, and they're absolutely adamant they're not going to back down. And in addition, in Yangon today, protesters targeted the Indonesian embassy after they heard that the Indonesian foreign minister was trying to convince Southeast Asian nations to persuade the Burmese military to accept a compromise where a new election could be run. The protesters say they are adamant that the election results of November last year, which the NLD won overwhelmingly, should be respected. The Indonesians, however, say that this is not true, that they are not planning any such scheme.
And as a sidebar to this, we have the story of how Malaysia has broken a court order and has deported more than 1,000 asylum seekers and children back to Myanmar.
Indeed, and this came as something of a shock a couple of hours ago after we heard earlier in the afternoon that the Malaysian court had decided that all of those asylum seekers would have a temporary stay until tomorrow, when a further ruling would be made. We've heard that 1,086 Myanmar nationals have been put on 3 Myanmar Navy ships that were waiting in Malaysian Navy docks and have now set off to be repatriated. And the Malaysian immigration chief says that all of those on the ships have gone back voluntarily, and there weren't any refugees on those ships. But the court case involved 6 people who the UNHCR said, or more than 6 people who the UNHCR said they had recognized as refugees, and minors, one of whom's parents, we understand, are still in Malaysia. So at this stage, it's unclear whether they have removed some of those people and kept them back for that second court hearing tomorrow. But I think something of a shock also that they've defied the court, particularly sending back so many people to a country which has undergone a military coup, and where some of those come from ethnic minorities who could very much be under threat when they return into the hands of that military government.
All right, Tony, thanks very much indeed for that. Thank you. Well, let's speak now to Phil Robinson, who's from Human Rights Watch, and to get further thoughts on this. Phil, first of all, so there we were just speaking a couple of hours ago, and the refugees' deportation was on hold, but not so. They are now deported and heading back to a country in the midst of a coup.
Yeah, this is outrageous and unacceptable. The Malaysian Immigration Department apparently thinks that it is above the law and outside of the courts. I mean, there was a clear Kuala Lumpur High Court order that stayed any action to remove this group until the court met tomorrow. They have defied that. All I can think is that apparently the Malaysian Immigration Department cares more about the needs of the Myanmar Navy that sent 3 boats to pick these people up and their inconvenience than respecting a court in Malaysia. And what we've seen, not only is the Director General of Immigration previously lied about this group, when he claimed that there were no refugees or asylum seekers among the 1,200 be sent back, but, now he's basically operating outside the law. So he needs to be investigated. The Prime Minister must order an investigation of him in the Immigration Department. And I think the National Human Rights Commission, Suhakam, must also immediately investigate.
What more do we know about this group who have been repatriated or en route to going back to Myanmar, in the sense of, are they asylum seekers? What's their makeup?
The experts in these matters, which is the UN Refugees Agency, UNHCR, has not been allowed to access these 1,200 people. And that's actually what we were asking for this whole period, is that allow them to have access, allow them to check who these people are, find the people who are refugees with UNHCR cards, find the people who have a legitimate claim to political asylum, and pull them aside. If they don't have a claim to asylum, or they're not a refugee, and they're not a child being separated from their parents, then, they can be deported. But the reality is that none of that happened. UNHCR has been completely left out of this, and the immigration has just, again, done whatever it wanted, completely outside the law.
And what are your concerns now for these people as they head back to a country in the state of crisis?
Well, my concerns is that they are going to face hostile interrogation and possible persecution by the military junta and its representatives in the Navy who picked them up today in Malaysia. That there's going to be a lot of hard time, that they're going to be forced to try to explain why they went to Malaysia. This is a government now in Myanmar that is a military junta and that has traditionally looked very badly at people leaving the country without permission. And they could be prosecuted for leaving Myanmar without authorization.
And what about any recourse? Is there any action that can now be taken?
Well, I think that the investigation into the Director General of Immigration and his Immigration Department needs to happen. And I think they should face severe penalties for defying the court. I think there also needs to be action based on the concerns that we and other human rights groups have raised, that people here were probably asylum seekers and refugees in that group. This is a completely outrageous violation of international human rights law by the Malaysian authorities, and I think that the Immigration Department has to pay for it. And if they were ordered from higher up, the people who gave that order have to be held responsible as well.
Phil Robertson, Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch's Asia Division, thanks very much indeed for that.
Thank you.